Welcome to First Contact Stories of the Call Center. I'm your host, Christian Montez, where we dive into the lives that connect us all, one call at a time, revealing the stories behind the leaders' transformative journeys in the contact center world. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of First Contact Stories of the Call Center. I'm your host, Christian Montez, and today we're going to sit down with Sam Falletta, the CEO of Incept. Look, if you don't know Sam, he's built a thriving business putting together culture first, which is super important. We're going to be talking about today. Embracing failure. It's always hard, but if you don't, it can be a game changer in your business. And then obviously navigating that ever-changing landscape in the customer experience. Sam, it's been a long time, right, since we've talked. How you been?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm over here living the dream still. Just don't wake me up.
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so look, we always start this with your origin story, right? Not everybody wakes up and says, I'm going to be in the contact center space, and I know you have a cool story, so we want our listeners to hear it. How did you get into this space? What did early career life look like for you? And, let's kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. So probably like a lot of kids, I just wanted to be like my dad. So my dad was a labor attorney the whole time I was growing up. Seemed to be super passionate about his work, loved kind of representing hardworking employees that felt like they needed to have a little bit of assistance to kind of get treated the way that they deserved. And so I really felt like that was kind of the career for me. And then I realized toward the end of high school, my greatest fear in the world was public speaking. So it was like, the week that you had the speech, I would get sick to my stomach. I just could not do it. So I talked to my dad and asked for some advice, and he was like, okay, I get that it's a hard thing. Like, do what you always do, break it down into individual problems and see if you can solve it that way. And ultimately what led me to the contact center was it was the first part of the legal profession that I felt I could learn, which was really like the communication and the persuasion, but the anonymity of not having to do it in front of somebody and not having to kind of be a public speaker was the thing that gave me the confidence to like, okay, if nobody can see me, if I can't see them, if I don't have to go through these ideas of like picturing everybody in their underwear or whatever, like hacks somebody was trying to give you, like maybe there's a chance that I can learn to put these two pieces together. So I'm from Akron, Ohio. So Infocision was at that time a smaller organization, but was growing. And through the love and care of a few people who helped out a kid who didn't deserve it, I basically worked on the phones my whole way through college.
It's crazy to think, knowing you for a little while now, that version of the story of being afraid to publicly speak and, that's nothing like the person that I know, right? There's this person that you sit there and go, oh, he can articulate himself really well, very well spoken, educated, has great ideas. We even had you on a webinar sometime back during the pandemic. And I sit back and I go, it's so crazy to see people's story of how that version of themselves and how they saw themselves was totally different. So how did you get from now this call center place and saying, this is where I'm going to stay for the next part of my career? Or was there something else in mind where you were going to do something else? Because eventually, right, it became Incept.
Yeah. So I worked at Infocision all through college. The things that I ended up finding out about the industry that I loved was that it really was a combination of a lot of the same things, right? It included persuasion. It was heavily kind of measured, and there was statistical performance, and I was fairly competitive, and I liked that. There was a hierarchy, so I liked the idea that I could see kind of what a career path could look like. And ultimately, Incept was founded by two brothers, one of which was the manager that I had worked for in college. So when all my friends were going out doing like pharmaceutical sales jobs and all that stuff, a good friend came to me and said, you should go check in on what Jeff and Brad are doing. I think you'd really enjoy it. And at this time they had literally was out of an apartment. Like their office was the bedrooms, like the corporate bathroom had a shower in it, all of that. And I'll save the long version, but the short version of the story is it basically Jeff's pitch was like, I know you can go do a pharmaceutical sales job, but here we're either gonna, blow up in 6 months and I'm not going to have a lot of options to promote, or we're going to go out of business and you can probably get that same job in 6 months. Like, why don't you take a shot on something that can grow? And I love the idea. And literally 6 months later, we were 50 people. They didn't have a lot of people to promote. So I got to be a personnel manager. And that really was the place where I kind of found my home. I liked that on the sophistication side, there's as much data as you'd ever want to use. It's technology as far as you want to go. But ultimately, what really drives this business is people and the relationships that you have with those people and the way you learn to communicate it. And it didn't seem to me that there was a lot that had a combination of both of those things, right? You could go get a really sophisticated job. And in that case, you didn't have as much dependent on the people, or you could go get a people job, but it wasn't nearly as sophisticated. So I think what's kept me here for, I guess, almost 30 years is really the combination of on the days where you really want to go fight a hard problem, like there's plenty of hard problems to fight. But on the days where you just need to know that you're doing something for someone or serving the greater good or making an impact, you've got this whole group of people that you can connect with and learn from, and hopefully contribute to.
It's really interesting to see how business owners become business owners, right? Because a lot of times, for many, not always, but for many, they've worked for other people. And there's this moment in which they say, I can do this better myself, or you're put in a position where it's like, oh my gosh, I have this opportunity, I can't pass it up. Or someone says, you should do this. I think you could excel at this. What was that moment for you from becoming an employee to becoming an owner? And what went through your mind? Was that just like, yeah, I can do it, let's roll? Or you're like, man, this is scary stuff. I don't know if this is going to work out. What did that look like in that moment?
Well, there were really kind of two phases of it. The first was when I had the opportunity to become president. So same founder basically came to me. So we had worked with some incredible logos kind of early in the career. So I got all this great experience, but we did have a little bit of a struggle kind of keeping them consistently, whether it was, our contact got promoted and somebody else came in and had a different set of relationships or whatever. So I was given the opportunity to kind of run the business very early in my career. I had real questions about it. And it was actually the same advice that kind of got me into the job that ended up leading to that, which was if things don't go well in 6 months, maybe they wouldn't have gone well anyway, and the outcome would have been the same. But if they do go well, you'll have all this experience and you'll have this great life lesson, like why not take a shot at it? So it was really kind of the willingness to step in to the risk and use the lesson as the benefit, regardless of the outcome. And so I did that for probably 10 or 11 years until the founder was ready to move on. And then I acquired the business basically using the same kind of philosophy, which is, okay, I've run this and it felt like I knew all of the things that an owner felt. And I realized I didn't. The analogy I use is like uncle versus father. Like you can be an uncle and feel like you understand what it's like to raise a kid. And I learned the difference between being a president and being an owner is really the difference between being as a president, you can still walk away and you can drop the kids back off and you have watched them for the weekend, but ultimately they're somebody else's. And for almost the last 10 years now, I've been the owner, and that really is a whole different kind of level of responsibility, of identity connected to the business. So the emotional side probably doesn't get as much discussion as like the tactical side, but I just have endless admiration for founders, owners, like the emotional stability to kind of weather that storm is something that I've really learned over the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting how the emotional piece that you're talking about, there's always this sense of like, yeah, they're the owner, they probably make a lot of money. Oh, they're the owner, they've worked really hard, right? There's these extremes of, employees can look at it as they're just the boss that's looking for themselves, or it's like, hey, this is a person that I admire and I'd like to be that person when I grow up, right? Or in my career, my path is I want to do what they do. But they don't talk about the emotional piece that comes into play of not only the difficult decisions, payroll, letting people go when it's your own business, when the business is improving, or when you see the headwinds of a decline or something that's transformative, right? Where you're gonna have to make that decision and there's that fork in the road to decide, am I gonna completely change my business model, or I'm not going to survive, right? Those things have to go through one's mind as a leader and as an owner. So for you, what is Incept doing today, and what are you looking at it from, the next 5-10 years? What does that path look like? Is it more of the same but bigger, same? What's it doing today, and what does the path forward look like?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot about myself in the process. Like, I don't think my skills are the ones that lend themselves to thousands or tens of thousands of people. That's both not as fulfilling as I want my day-to-day work to be, and it's probably also not when my skills are the best. So we've always been kind of a couple hundred all the way up to maybe 5. I think that size probably makes a lot of sense for us. I think the strategies and the speed of change is the thing that's more dynamic now than ever, really, which is, we were kind of entirely premise-based going into COVID, and we have, a dozen people in an office now. And our bread and butter really was the culture that we have built based on physical proximity. So to try to replicate a lot of those things without some of the stuff that really made our secret sauce so special has been one of the bigger professional challenges I've had since. So I think as we look forward, obviously technology is going to play a big part of it. We'll probably talk about some predictions around kind of how we think that impact is going to go. I think there's always going to be a need for human problem solving. I just think they're going to be allocated to the more complex problems. But ultimately, kind of from a head count, from a volume, from a structure standpoint, I think the industry is going to look fairly similar for a while, even if the edges get a little more nuanced in the way we support the agent or measure the agent or measure the customer satisfaction. But ultimately, people are going to need help solving their problems forever. Now, the complexity of those problems may change, but ultimately for us, we see people are the center of that. And we probably see over the next 5 to 10 years, just bringing the whole solution, being the technological part, the professional services, the consulting, in some cases, the partner relationships, that version of complexity is probably only going to grow in our perspective.
We've talked a lot about culture, and I know between you and I, culture is like a huge thing, right? And it's really an identity for the business. Can you kind of walk through that moment where you realized that culture wasn't just this nice to have, it actually became a differentiator in your business? And how was that, evolved over time, if at all?
Yeah. So some of it was just the naivety of never having been a president before. So when I first took over, some of the simplest math was just like looking at 75% of our expenses were people. And we were like, okay, well, it feels like if we get that part right, kind of the rest will figure itself out. This has kind of been answering that question, like how do you engage those people in a more meaningful way, has probably been the thread of my professional career since then. We digested all the material, whether it was, kind of Gallup survey information or Fortune, top companies to work for, Simon Sinek start with. We really just implemented all of that stuff to say like, okay, if employee engagement is the thing that drives retention, then we have to get great at employee engagement. And the place that floored us the most was for several years, we did that, right? We won a bunch of awards and started seeing our engagement scores and kind of everything that the literature said we should measure was in the top few percentiles. And it wasn't dramatically changing turnover, which was like the disappointment of my career originally. And through a series of question and answer and some external help, and ultimately what we found is that in most cases, the literature that drives that research is making some assumptions that people are already kind of into the middle of Maslow's hierarchy. And as we know, most of the contact center staff is not living in that world yet. So we actually shifted the model quite a bit to almost a social services model, and things like vacations that used to be rewards that would have, played to ego turned into like Walmart gift cards or gas cards. So we kind of have always had this theme of employee engagement as the critical component, but the way we deliver it really kind of split off once we said, okay, if it's employee engagement, but it's to this specific audience, how do we really emphasize that? It led to things like, on-staff counselor for mental health issues. And essentially our attendance policy now is not point-based, but essentially the worst thing to happen when somebody's going through an issue with a family member or taking care of a parent is to then take their job away. So as long as somebody's communicating with us, they have a path to stay employed through all of those problems. So we've kind of used this theme of employee engagement, but have really built the policies almost 180 degrees from where we started.
Running a contact center these days takes a great deal of courage and fortitude. Nobel Biz would like to salute the contact center community for not giving up and working hard to drive their businesses down the road to success. As the promise keepers of the industry, our goal was to provide one of the most versatile and cost-efficient omni-channel solutions on the market. Nobel Biz Omni Plus is a cloud contact center software that gives instant access to a full range selection of channels, from voice calls, two-way SMS, email, WhatsApp, Twitter, Telegram, among others. Our solution offers complete control over the externalities by switching from an on-premise technology to a cloud-based solution in just a matter of hours. Get integrated compliance support, advanced reporting, seamless agent and supervisor dashboards, and many more performance-enhancing capabilities, all in just one product. Nobel Biz Omni Plus, the future-proof solution for scaling contact center operations. Learn more about Nobel Biz Omni Plus at www.nobelbiz.com.
It's so awesome how companies always talk about their employees are their biggest asset and the most important thing. And then separately, companies a lot of times talk about how know your customer, really understand your customer. And then you've taken what a lot of people talk about, which is, if you really care about turnover, not looking at it, it's a numbers game only, right? I just have to have the knowledge that there's high turnover, and then there's a cost to recruiting, a cost to onboarding, a cost to, all these things. And you sit back and go, well, if I know my internal customer, my employees, and I see that what the world tells me motivates them doesn't align, then you go back and you look and see what motivates that group. And you came up with some things like the gift cards and so on and so forth. Knowing that internal group better, you saw better outcomes. And then you're able to then shift that and say, okay, how do I continue to optimize this, knowing that the outcome I want is if I have lower turnover, better engagement, it actually makes me more successful with my external customer, right? And we always talk about that, but we don't always do something about it. Or when we do something about it, it's kind of a checkbox. I did it. Let's move on. And it's really interesting that you saw that next piece, that when you hit that wall, it wasn't like, well, we did the best practice, so this is as good as we're going to get. You were like, I'm not good with that. How do we get that next piece, which is super cool to see.
Yeah, a lot of it was just the exercise of kind of questioning previously held beliefs, right? Like an attendance policy that says, okay, now you're on final probation. Like that implies that you believe that somebody has control over that decision. Like, oh, if I threaten their employment, then they're going to elect not to take care of their parent that day. And it's like, well, we don't want somebody who's going to make that choice. We want somebody who's going to be able to say, like, we believe that you fundamentally work because it's a good way for you to provide a living and to gain the skills you want. We believe we offer those in a way that you want to keep doing it. So what are the barriers to that working for both of us? Now, it does make it complex for us to serve the customer because we have to have a much higher staffing ratio to make sure that we can kind of deal with those fluctuations for somebody who can fall out and not get terminated. So maybe our call off percentage on an average day is a little higher, but they all normalize, right? So whether that number's 2% higher than somebody else's, once we know it, we can just build the rest of our system around it. And then the flexibility of that system, we just believe is so much more attractive to the employee who needs, that kind of adjustment. I'm going through a lot of the same things with family health issue. Like if I was employed by a typical employer, I'm not sure my last 6 months would have enabled to keep me employed. But ultimately, I could figure out how to get all the work done that needs to be done, and it's not harming anybody in the process. And why shouldn't we extend those same things to our people as long as the customer gets what they need at the end?
Yeah, having that flexibility and the willingness to come up with something creative and try things to see and measure whether they're working or not. That extra effort can be the difference of just a culture and better environment. Now, over time, the business has grown, right? And you said the fluctuations of where you sit, but over time, there were moments where you went from that 50 to a couple hundred, and then you said you peaked around, 500-ish at some point. During those growth moments, was there anything unexpected from a challenge perspective that you ran into when it came to scaling? And if so, how did you manage through that? And did it impact the culture of the business, or did you have a learning lesson through that growth?
Yeah, I think it's kind of constant. And the number of times that we would end up doing something at one level, like the phrase is a little bit cliche, but what got you here won't get you there is so true in so many ways, especially for the leader. So for me, the thing that was probably the biggest shock, and the thing that I've tried as hard as I can to figure out how to get around, is like the distance from the people. That was always the thing that I felt like was a strength. And as you grow, that becomes less and less a part of your role. But there are ways that you can still schedule that in, right? So I still have a monthly meeting. Now it's up to 4 monthly meetings. That's a voluntary access to any hourly employee who wants to come and talk about whatever it is they want to talk about. That would have been far less kind of structured in the past, because they could grab me when I was walking to the break room, or we could kind of have an ad hoc lunch decision to go. So I think the theme through all of that, and the phrase that I learned through one of the Vistage leaders, was to just consistently ask the question, like, what new information has come to light since we made that decision? So there's a lot of times, and I've learned as a leader that I've screwed up more people this way than just about any other, is to say, like, okay, here's the direction we're going. And when they compare that to a decision that was made at some point in the past, it can sound really contradictory. So the ability to say either here's the difference between the information we had then and now and why we're doing it, or just asking yourself, from the time we made that decision on the way the attendance policy was going to work, what were the conditions? Oh, okay, what is changed? Okay, now there's a different solution. So I think maybe the saving grace in that whole thing has just been the simplicity of the question of, like, what new information has come to light since whatever thing you're thinking about? And with that new information, is that still the right decision, or do you need to go a different way? So I'm fairly comfortable. I learned very early on I was going to make a bunch of mistakes. So I got comfortable with volume of reps versus batting average, right? Like it isn't really the percentage of time. It's the volume of times you can be right. And if it was going to take me twice as many chances, I just had to be willing to take twice as many shots faster than others. So I learned fairly quickly just to not get my ego caught up in being right or wrong in the moment, but be willing to try new stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting as a leader, right? You have that piece where you went from A to B in your mind, but to others, you went from A to G. And they're like, how did you get there? Right? What is that thing in that shit? Right? And sometimes leaders will do, well, that's just common sense, or, almost like a mind reading, like you should know this, right? But no one is going through your mindset, your day. So you being able to clearly articulate the goals, especially changes in direction of the business, and where their specific spot in the bus makes it so that you can get to where you need to go. If we don't take the time to do what you do, then there's going to be a lot of confusion, a lot of people not understanding why they're doing these changes, or maybe it's like you're punishing them. It's something I must have done. And so that's interesting how that works. Now, to shift that piece a little bit, right? We talked some years back during the pandemic, and there was a webinar episode that we had that was fantastic around the untold stories of mental health. And it was specific around studies and things that you were working on in the contact center. And part of that, from what I remember, was really about the health of the employee and how them being isolated, them not having a conducive work environment, how did that actually impact mental health versus just convenience and, hey, you don't have water cooler talk or meetings? Has anything from that moment till now changed? Is all of that still relevant today in this, we'll call it hybrid and back in office work? What have you learned, if anything, since that time frame up until what's now going on?
Yeah, probably the biggest lesson is how much burden / responsibility we put on the supervisors, and how much that's even changed since the in-office environment. So that and we're almost exclusively remote still. We have the opportunity for people to come in, and they do, but it's not a huge portion. I think back then one of the questions that we were debating that ultimately I think we now have some of the answer to was this question. Kind of the going phrase in the market was like, we believe our people are grown-ups and we're going to ask them what they want, and then we're going to do what their answer is. And the question was like, is leading with preference the right way to lead? Because I fully understand that people say my preference is to work from home. It's just more convenient. But our preference in the way we eat or exercise or like those aren't often the healthiest end results either. But if we just said, eat what is your preference or exercise what is your preference, we wouldn't be as healthy as we could be. And that question has still been the thing that is the hardest onion to peel, because we do hear people that say, I need to work from home. Like, it's not just a preference, it's a requirement. But the kids are in the home, or the spouse is in the home, or ailing elder parent is in the home, and they do not get the release from a lot of those stresses. So while it is their preference, and in some cases the requirement, as a person, I don't think they're as healthy as when there was an option to come into a location and kind of put all that behind. So kind of our response to that has really been some of the same tools that he used before, right? I believe anybody would benefit from time with a counselor, regardless of kind of how you frame whatever situation you're in. So I think there's this perception that it requires a crisis or some history of trauma. The more I've talked to my friends or other leaders about this, we all have some version of trauma that we maybe didn't experience at the moment as such, but there's benefit to talking through that. So we try to model transparency to give everybody the idea that it's okay to share those kind of things. I'm probably overly personal about my backstory or my current story with our people just to help them understand. I spent this morning running my mom to an appointment that she couldn't get to on her own. And I'll communicate to the team, like, I'm going to be out of the office for the next 3 hours because I'm taking my mom. Like, I don't think you should be embarrassed by that. I think you should let everybody know that it's okay to build your life around the things that actually happen. But the ability to help people self-sustain versus an environment where we were all in a community and you could kind of lift them up has been kind of the biggest difference, I think. And it just takes a lot more resources to do in this version than it did in the last one.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot of times that, you're in the people business, right? That's what we do. But when someone comes and says, hey, sorry, I was late for X, Y, and Z, some of the old approaches was, I don't really care, none of my business. Your job is just to get here on time, right? You figure it out. And you're articulating that there are human beings that work in businesses. There is not perfection. It's how do you find a way to balance giving the employee the tool sets and the experience that gives them an opportunity to be as successful as possible, but also have the expectation that there needs to be standards. There has to be things that they know that they are meeting the expectations or not. They know what the expectations are so that you can still deliver for your end customer. Because many times, right, I'm sure your end customer goes, yeah, it's okay that you didn't meet your SLAs. It's okay that you didn't service my business. I understand that your people were sick. And that's not to say that you don't have customers that are, but there's always this piece, right, of having to balance your reality is many times your customer doesn't care. And they say they care, right? Because they no one wants to be that cold, but the reality is they are, and many times it's like, it's very transactional. There's 7 outsourcers I outsource to. You're one of many. And if you don't meet the standard, guess what? You lose the work and it goes elsewhere. So finding that balance is super important. Having the mental health aspect was unique during the time when we were talking about it. Or at least it felt unique that was an approach where you were literally looking at that. But to kind of pivot a little bit, many people that have dipped their toe in the contact center space, maybe it was in college or, early life, it was a transition job for them. It was just a moment in time and some were like, oh, nope, never doing that again. Not a good fit. And there's still a lot of people like yourself that have made a career out of it. But for those that still look at it as this view of, I would never work in that space, that's a transition job. Coming from your seat, what are the things from leadership or communication or business acumen or whatever are some of those misconceptions that you actually learn working in the contact center that you wouldn't get otherwise if you didn't give it a chance?
Yeah. So we actually have, it's a great question. We thought through this enough that we actually went and looked for data to see if there's a story out there that meets it. And the Brookings Institute actually had done a study basically measuring what they were deeming kind of entry-level jobs and then next-level jobs. And through all of the summaries, what they came out with is the job that you can graduate from with the highest increase in wages is actually a customer service job. And when you think about it, it's actually somewhat practical, right? You're learning to listen, you're learning empathy, you're dealing with a high percentage of irate customers. So all the things that people kind of articulate about the server role that is widely regarded as like this great, everybody should serve, for at least a year in college or something. Like there's this narrative that says like, oh, you should go do this thing because it's going to be this foundation for the whole rest of your career, whether you're going to be in sales or in management. But like the contact center is exactly the same thing. And with the level of measurement and accountability and communication that's even ramped up a little more. So we believe it's a perfect entry level job for everybody. The reason I think people, or at least I've stayed in it, and the reason I think it's so attractive to others that can stay in it is, and you see this just knowing kind of our circle in the industry, it's filled with people who for 20 years have learned communication. So you get like incredible listeners and incredible storytellers and incredible communicators and great teachers. And it's like all the skills for the people that have risen in the industry are also all of the skills of the people that you look up to the most and are the most appreciated of. So again, it sounds maybe a little cliche to say like it really is the people, but it is filled with some of the best people I've ever met. A lot of who have done well, but have given up opportunities where they could have done far better had they gone somewhere else. But they knew they were either serving a population or a customer they were passionate about or a cause they believed in. And those people are then connected to people who can get you to anywhere else in the world. So we've told, we've had people come in kind of early in their career and say like, our job is for you to get where you want. We believe we have a path for you to get all of those steps here. But you got to tell us like what your path is. And whenever we get to the right off ramp, like we'll help you in that, if you feel like middle management is your top end and then you want to go be an individual contributor somewhere, we are 100% supportive of that. And we'll help you go figure out that individual contributor role because I want you to progress and I want you to have a goal. But to me, kind of through all of the levels, there is something in this profession for somebody to chase. And, I guess for me, the story is so personal because it's done so much for my family and my friends and the people that we can support in the community and the philanthropies that we've been able to give to it. It really has just been a meaningful 30-ish years, all doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's so cool that when we talk about developing people, right, there's a lot of companies, unfortunately, that everyone has a role and they just want to build this perfect team where just that's the role you're in. If you're a kicker today, you're always going to be a kicker. If you're a quarterback, you're always a quarterback. There's this like thing that we've already got what we want for the spots on the bus and we just don't want to disrupt the bus, right? But then there's other businesses that go, well, if you look at it, it's really about finding the right talent, developing and maintaining that talent, knowing that at some point that talent is going to do other stuff, whether it's in your organization or to go somewhere else. So you got to be really good about finding new talent and then developing people for your future leaders. And if you're not good at that, then you're going to have a lot of people with the mindset is, I can't lose that person. Because if I lose that person, then it creates this big hole in my department and it's detrimental. And they're worried about what they're losing versus what have I gained by getting this person to this level? Now they can move up in my business, or they go up and they go do something great at another company and you go develop your next set of superstars. And who knows, maybe it's your time to leave and there's no place for you in your company. And it turns out that person that you helped out get their next role or you helped develop them in their career, maybe they get you in the door somewhere else. And you said it earlier, you know, there's all these people in our industry that are great listeners, great communicators. They're also great from a networking perspective, building those relationships and being able to know that they surpass all the things that you get limited to of being at a single company or in a single vertical. So with that said, you know, in mistakes, right? Mistakes happen. We've talked about how important it is to learn from those mistakes. You were saying you have this high rep rate, you know, a high amount, knowing that you got to maybe learn differently. But when it comes to a failure or a misstep, really being able to then lead to some sort of major breakthrough, what was something pivotal during your growth and your time, whether it's at Incept or elsewhere? It was just, man, something flopped, didn't go the way you wanted, but it was a great learning opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's probably a bunch, and I think the themes around the ones that I really regret have all been people related. Right. With internal people, sometimes I didn't get to understand them well enough. I didn't maybe ask the right questions. Sometimes I pushed people harder than maybe they would have wanted, and I could have listened a little better, and I maybe pushed them beyond where they were ready to be. In other cases, I could think of people that I probably didn't give an opportunity to as early as maybe they would have deserved it, and maybe we could have changed a different trajectory. On the customer side, probably the same thing. You know, we've had, really, like the best years in our business have been when one or two customers have had really good years. The worst years in our business have been when one or two customers have had really bad years. So as much as we try to avoid concentration, there are times at our size where, you know, a couple people can really influence it. And there's definitely instances there where either I didn't predict, the challenges that organization would be going through, or I wasn't close enough to the right people. So there isn't really one that sticks out, because I believe that you're a product of all of the things that happened, right? So the mistakes that really were painful at the beginning are the things that led us to be successful by correcting those mistakes. So we lost a big customer early in my career, and it was a painful transition. And then we added process to avoid that again later. And then we grew too fast, and that was painful, but then we added process to figure out how to throttle that a little bit more. So I think to me, the lesson in all of this has been, I think in general people are, I know I am far more likely to make a person mistake than I am to make kind of a strategy or a decision mistake. And maybe I'm just blurring those two, but the reminder to myself is like, ask the question that you're afraid to ask, or kind of push through the first denial to see if there's something else there. Because there's very few times that you're really surprised. There's some times where you didn't, like, you had a glimpse, but you were afraid of what the answer was, so maybe you walked away with it. But in all of those scenarios, there wasn't a situation where I wasn't denying a reality that I probably knew existed, that I just wasn't willing to go a little bit deeper and deal with the pain earlier by kind of confronting the issue at the time.
A famous African proverb says that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. At Nobel Biz, we have made it our mission to travel far and wide with our partners and clients. As a complete telecom services provider with over 20 years of experience in the industry, Nobel Biz offers the only voice carrier network designed with the sole purpose of serving call centers around the world. This contact center dedicated carrier network provides crystal clear voice traffic, up-to-date compliance tools, intelligent routing, and highly secure data protocols combined with 99.9% uptime and easy setup. Our goal for 2022 is to become the ultimate partner and provider for the contact center industry by placing service quality at the top of our priority list. To top it off, at Nobel Biz, we have the most competitive cost per minute model in the industry. Need proof? Reach out to us and learn more about the Nobel Biz Voice Carrier Network at www.nobelbiz.com.
Well, it's really neat to hear how everyone takes things that are difficult, right? How do you just go straight into it and it is what it is and you'll learn from it, to sometimes you get paralyzed by the fear of the unknown or of something failing, right? And then everything in between. So it's really cool to see how you look at these things, you react to them, and you just find a way to move forward. And none of it, just freezes you in the moment, right? You kind of just absorb the fact that there's something you didn't expect to happen, and then you learn from it and you move on. So there's this continuous movement. Now, when we talk about continuous movement and things that are disruptive and the unknown, AI is everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone is saying if you don't adopt it, you'll be left behind. And specifically in our industry, right? There's a big talk about, is all agent use going to go away or significantly go away because of the advent of generative AI and all the additional iterations of AI. So from your perspective, where are you seeing AI being adopted today? Where do you see it in the near future? And, is it all hype? Is it not fully baked yet? Or is everything just ready to rock and roll and the whole paradigm is going to shift?
Yeah. I think this one is a little different than other trends that we've seen like this, but I think the framework to analyze it is similar. So I'll give two examples of the way we're kind of thinking about it. So the first is, everybody loves to talk about kind of what falls out of in agent handling, like what's going to move to automated. And for those watching this that have been around long enough, like there was a time when IVR was that threat, and then there was a time when online access was that threat. So like there's a ton of focus on kind of what's going to get automated and how much, the way we refer to it, is going to fall out of the bottom of the funnel. But there is rarely as much talk about what's moving into the top of the funnel, which we've seen over and over. In this phrase I'm using, top of the funnel, like moving from what traditionally was face-to-face to now being an inside or a contact center role. So when I grew up, there was a mortgage person in every city and there was an insurance person in every city. And largely those industries are now looking a lot like contact center jobs. So we think that is just always going to be a function. So there's always going to be something that continues to get automated, and there's going to be always something that's a little more sophisticated. So the net volume is going to stay similar and just continue to get more and more complicated for people to handle. And we think over the last 5 years, that's largely been the case. So I think AI is going to do a lot of that same stuff. I think the straightforward, kind of simple, rudimentary things a lot of people are already automating. The problem with that, and the other framework that we look at, is it's just an accelerator of the policies you have in place. So if you have customer-friendly policies, you can cancel with no harm done, or you can reschedule simply. Like, to technically implement that is fairly easy and presents a pretty good experience. But if you have bad customer policies and you try to automate them, it isn't that technically you can't do it. It's that the customer's still upset and they are still going to want to talk to somebody about, how do I resolve my issue? Not technically, but how do I get the result that I want? So the question that I see most people struggling with is the underlying technology systems to deliver what the customer actually needs, not just the tool that sits on top of it. So whether it's the knowledge base, the knowledge base isn't just your frequently asked questions. Like, it's the product of the last 1,000 hours of calls, right? What are people asking? What are what's the language that gave the highest customer satisfaction response? And then how do you automate and streamline that? Great AI version. But if you can't access the data, or if it's in two different places, or if you don't have a policy that allows it to actually be delivered to the customer, It's going to be a lot of people spending a lot of money for things that ultimately don't accomplish the goal, which is you may get that transaction completed faster, but you didn't save a customer, upsell them, increase lifetime value. So I think it is real. I think the technology is real, but I think the challenges are the ones that we've always had, which is data security is more important than ever. Customer contracts and how you're managing that data security is tighter than ever. What system you give access to any of that stuff has to go through a dozen different people, whether it's your customer or your internal organization or the 3 other organizations that you're partnering with. And I'm not hearing as much talk about how people are solving the infrastructure problems as I am kind of the technology that sits on top of it. So that's the thing that I worry about, is that we're going to end up spending a whole bunch of time evaluating the technology and not ultimately solving the thing that sat underneath it that will enable some really incredible technology to solve business problems. But it just doesn't feel as ready as the narrative. So my example is, so we have 6 different tools that we're currently deploying for completely different reasons. Partially because we think there's going to be a bunch of consolidation at some point, right? Some of these are really well funded. Some are bootstrapped. Some are going to get bought. Some are going to double. Some are going to go out of business. We don't know which one's which, so we can't tie ourselves to any individual solution exclusively. But it is a really interesting time. And I don't recall it being quite this pronounced even in those previous iterations.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about 2 pieces you talked about. I'll start with the latter, which is, I go to a lot of trade shows. My team goes to a lot of trade shows. And the amount of companies that offer some form of, cool, shiny object tech piece, the times that I see them at the same trade shows the following year, there's a big difference in the ones that show up and they're a flash in the pan and you never even hear about them anymore, right? So there's gobs and gobs of money going into tech, and especially anything that even has the word AI, even if it's not even AI, it's just automation in a very practical form. It's been around forever. But right now there's a lot of people just trying to monetize it. And one of the gaps that I see is on the former pieces is what are you trying to solve for? What are you understanding is the customer experience? The customer experience is not just the call center. It's not just that one time they call in or send an email or an SMS or whatever it is. Like you said, the way they're digesting FAQs or maybe even the manual in the product they bought or whatever it is, it drives an experience. And if they don't know what they're solving for, then all you're doing is increasing how many people are upset, right? You can have a terrible IVR and you can really piss some people off. And so you're going to have highly skilled agents, reps, whatever role they're playing to be able to deal with someone that's really upset. Because the energy to diffuse that and to get them into a resolution is a lot more difficult than someone really happy to talk to you. So it's kind of interesting how AI right now seems to be this buzzword, but it sounds like it's still about where and what you're going to use it for, how you're going to measure if it's successful or not. And ultimately, you're right, diversifying your tech stack is probably important if you're concerned that you're building all your stuff around one product or company from an AI or, new tech, and they disappear tomorrow, and it can become pretty disruptive to your business for sure. Any other tech, though, that you're seeing or any other trends outside of AI that you're seeing being adopted or should get adopted?
Probably more should. So maybe I'm not seeing it as relevant as it really is, but the one that has surprised me as it getting talked about more is there's kind of the service stack. So whether that's, technology, geographic location of outsourcer, ultimately who's going to end up servicing it. Like there's a lot of time spent over there. I don't hear as often that same level of diligence on like the customer base stack. And I feel like one of the things that these new technology tools give us the ability to do is to get way more specific about how we service the whole customer base. And I think there's a lot of people who have really good programs for the top 5%, but I don't know why it's not the top 25% or why somebody isn't taking just the bottom we're going to test AI, but we're only going to do it with this segment of the population. So if we're wrong, we've minimized all the losses because all of these tools are intelligent enough to be doing elements of that now. So the reason, we're entirely domestic, the reason we continue to be bullish is, especially at our size, we think some of these tools are going to give people the ability to save money on segments of the database that used to be overly expensive, that we believe there's a business case to then reinvest in segments of your customer base that are probably getting underserved. And that tends to be where we play. So I think that's one that I'm watching fairly well, is not just, the platinum tier level, but, the 2 or 3 levels below that have indications that they could grow to platinum tier, or they have this many transactions in this period of time. What are the ways that you can add the technology, but then give them an out if they want to be serviced differently, and allocate the percentage of your pie that's appropriate to the percentage of the revenue or gross profit that they generate? That feels to me like a big theme that we're trying to get kind of our hands around is the same level of diligence being given to the customer dissection as it is to the tech and outsourcing stack on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, when you just have an in-house department or center, right, servicing your customer, your mindset is going to be one way. And when you're looking at it as an outsourcer, especially when you're dealing with a lot of different types of customers that all have their own unique demands and needs of how they want things done and how they want to see data, you're able to get this more holistic view that gives you kind of this bigger, broader, looking from outside the box approach. And so I'm sure there's some opportunity for you to really educate your customers and say, here's what we've seen other people like you do, versus just saying, oh, that's what you want to do? Sure, we'll just do that and hope you like it, versus have you thought about this in addition to what you're doing? So that's pretty interesting. Now, I know we can talk forever, and I want to leave a little bit of time for the personal side for a minute, if that's okay. You've traveled a lot internationally. You've really interacted with a lot of different cultures. Has there been any travel or moments that have kind of shaped how you approach business, especially considering your business is U.S. based and staff is U.S. based, and you don't have a lot of external staff from a business standpoint?
So probably 2 for totally different reasons. So I did a mission trip to Haiti once, and it was shortly after they had the earthquake. So the country was going through all kinds of problems, and the places that we went were kind of out and around the capital. And the thing that struck me, it was a great trip for a bunch of reasons, but the thing that stood out the most was the children were walking, an hour and a half to school each day. The reason we were there was we were helping to support, build basically the schoolhouses that like a whole community would go to. And so we would take the walk with them in the mornings and then the walk back. And it was the privilege that they took for the opportunity to go learn was something that I realized isn't mirrored many other places. And it really emphasized this, like, we largely assume that the ability to continue to develop our skills is a given. And for them, it's a privilege. And it was like, man, that is a really interesting, my kids complain half as much each day about going to school as they do go in and learn. And this was this whole community that by almost all accounts had nothing, was happier than any community I'd ever been in, and really thirsted for knowledge. So the ability to kind of like, okay, what am I investing in today to improve myself and my own capacity and knowledge is probably the takeaway from that. And then Italy. So I'm the product of 4 Italian immigrants. So both parents had come from Italy, and the ability just to have gone back to the place that you're from was like a connection I didn't expect. Like I didn't know that you would feel a belonging or a welcoming or something like that. And to think about how that is different for everybody, can you create a community that makes people feel welcome, has probably been the 2 biggest translations for me.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people get those kinds of experiences, right? but those experiences, the way you describe them in that moment, I'm sitting there going like, yeah, that would be really impactful. That would be a really, unique experience that probably a lot of people don't get. And so that gives you a worldview that helps, hopefully, like you've said, translate into how do you create better experiences back home, right? And I know you love learning. I love how you're always giving great information and content as well. But is there a book or a personal mantra or anything that has really significantly influenced your life and, really resonates deeply with you?
Yeah, so there's a million. The one for what we've talked about today, the one that kind of launched a lot of this model around kind of how we could build for our employees was a book by a lady named Layla Jana called Give Work. So she was the original founder of Samasource. Ultimately, she passed away early due to cancer at the age of like 37, but she had spoken at a local university that I was a speaker at, and I got to meet her firsthand, had never come in contact with her before. And kind of the whole premise is that the dignity that comes from work, people don't just work for the income, they work for the dignity of the work and for the knowledge that they gain. And I had not heard anybody translate that to the way our industry thought about what we were doing for people before. So that was super meaningful. And she has really a whole kind of playbook on how you can create kind of social impact through employment. So that we've modeled a lot of that. One of my favorite phrases was actually, I ended up stealing it off of a TikTok, but it's a Denzel Washington commencement speech. And he tells a story that he took from Les Brown. And it's this idea that, picture yourself on your deathbed, lying around you are the ghosts of your unfulfilled potential. And they're like all the ideas that you never capitalized on or the shots that you didn't take. And if you picture that and you hear them say, now that you're on your deathbed, like we have to go, like we came to you because we wanted you to bring us to life. And now we have to go to the grave with you. So like, what are your ghosts of unfulfilled potential could be, is just a fascinating way not to think about, kind of what is your quarterly metric? Because a lot of us are taught, like, just figure out how to get a win. But the idea of inverting that a little bit, saying like, okay, what is your maximum potential impact? And how close to that are you living, delivering, performing? Like that is just a fascinating way to think about it. And is one that we use, kind of all the way down to our core vision statement, which is to help you be the best version of yourself. So that everybody's potential is going to be variable, but the idea of get as close as you can to your potential versus kind of hit an arbitrary number is a really core and kind of fundamental message that I've learned to adopt.
Yeah, I love the dignity of work piece, and also just what are the life goals? What is the big picture? Are you just blinders looking in what's right in front of you, or have you stepped back to be able to see what's the purpose? What are you doing this for? It's so cool. And, I know there's going to be people in the audience that want to connect with you or with Incept. How best can they do that?
LinkedIn is easy. Sam Falletta at Incept. Email address is sam.falletta@inceptresults.com. I'm fairly accessible on both. So yeah, I'd love to meet anybody, especially talking around kind of the people and the passion part of the project. I'm spending a lot of time on that now.
Yeah, you're not a hidden figure. They're not going to have to hunt you down to find you. So it's always great that you have that open door policy. Now, look, I love that we had a great conversation. Hopefully our audience loved it as well. So thanks so much for joining today. And it was really good information. So for everybody else, thanks for joining. We appreciate you coming in, and hopefully the episode had some value. If you do enjoy the stuff, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. But for now, stay connected with us through LinkedIn and keep an eye out for the next episode.
Thank you for joining me in this episode. If you're loving the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button on your YouTube channel for exclusive clips, webinars, workshops, and bonus materials. And if you're an Apple iTunes listener, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star rating and review to help spread the word. On our YouTube page, you can also leave us feedback, comments, and suggest future guests that you'd like to hear from. For even more valuable insights and information on the call center world, visit nobelbiz.com and access our on-demand webinars. I'm Christian Montez, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of First Contact Podcast. Stay with us for the next exciting chapter.